Hello, yeah. Welcome back to the podcast series after a fairly massive break over
Many
however long, yeah,
months.
like 3 decades. But we're back. We're back having a chat, and it's going to be fun. We thought we'd kick off this year. We may as well just jump straight into it. We thought we'd kick off this year with a bit of a run through of the Game Jam.
Yeah, this is essentially the latest late meta podcast that we've ever done because one, we're 3 months late into the year, and we're also a month late of saying what about the Game Jam.
Yeah.
So,
We said at the time, we're like, oh, we should do this. The next time we should do a rundown of the Game Jam. And then, yeah, all of a sudden it was a
and then
month.
we're like,
And we're like,
but Zelda beckons.
yeah,
So
that's
we
all
have
right.
to
But
finish playing that.
we've released that monster off of our backs. So now we're free to get back to the fun stuff. Yeah, I suppose we should really start with a bit of a rundown for what the Game Jam actually is for everyone who doesn't know or hasn't been.
Yeah.
So essentially, the Global Game Jam happens every year. It's a worldwide event. There are sites all over the world. Happens on one of the last weekends in January. I'm sure this
It is, yeah, it's pretty much
yeah.
the last weekend in January. It falls on my sister's birthday literally every year.
Ah, yeah, true.
Which she's learned to accept now.
Yeah.
It's just fine. Stefan said it's a worldwide thing. For West Australia, it was at ECU University and Murdoch University, and we went to the ECU one. And it basically, we all get together, we all sit in a really dark room, and then we're told a theme of some kind, and then a bunch of kind of sub themes. I can't remember what they call them.
Diversifiers.
Diversifiers, which you don't have to do, but it makes it more interesting if you do.
Mm.
And then you're given 48 hours to get into groups and just make a game. And then you show it off and upload it, and everyone has a good time and learns a lot.
Yeah, and then you go home and sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the second one that we've done. We went a couple of years ago and did one, but we thought we'd jump back into it this year. And yeah, it was good fun. So this year's theme was ritual.
Exclamation mark.
Yeah, ritual exclamation mark. In case you didn't feel excited enough by me saying that, it is a Sunday morning. Which was, I suppose it was funny. The theme, I wasn't expecting it to be something like that, because I know the last time we did it, the theme was like a fairly long sentence.
It was something along the lines of you see only what you want to see.
Yeah, something about seeing things in different ways.
Some kind of philosophical meaning thing.
Yeah.
And that was very much portrayed in our reaction to it initially, because it just came up on the screen like ritual, and we're just like, what? That's okay. But the thing is, the more you thought about it, the more you thought, oh, actually, that's not too bad. Yeah, that's a very interesting concept. Especially if you kind of think outside the typical straight up thought of Satan and all his minions.
Yeah, and I think that was the real kind of genius of a theme like that. A lot of the ones I've kind of seen or read in the past have been very like fairly limiting, unless you like, I suppose if you kind of think laterally enough, you can make anything into something crazy. But like, I think ritual is just that right balance between giving you a starting point and being so open-ended that, like we saw a great variety of games, even with what was produced here in Perth. I didn't go and really have a look at much else of what happened kind of worldwide. But even here, there was quite some different interpretations of the idea of ritual, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, I was well, because everyone immediately thought of, like I said, Satan, ritual, blood and stuff. And then everyone thought, no, wait, everyone else is going to think of that. What else can we think of that involves ritual? And that was kind of the interesting part of it, because no one wanted to do an atypical thing. And they kind of rolled with other ideas as opposed to just blood and gore.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, that works. Made it very interesting. And it meant, to our surprise, we didn't actually have to write any kind of scary-ish music. Because that was our thought as well. We're like, oh, Satan, all right, well, let's just get some clusters in and some
better get the horror music out.
Some chanting, sorted. And then we made nothing like that in the whole thing.
It's actually quite nice because I suppose it meant for us there was something a bit meatier to do with the actual music. I mean, if someone just kind of comes to you and is like, yeah, you know, horror theme, blood, whatever, you kind of think, well, there's one way I can go with this. Whereas a few of them, like a few of the games, the actual aesthetic of the game was quite different to that, so it meant that we could put a bit of variety into what we wrote. Um, so yeah, we should probably kind of start talking about the the audio side of things.
Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, we can do that if you want.
I'm just trying to think
Yeah.
the way things went in that evening. We got introduced to the theme. There was a bunch of icebreaker exercises, which
Yeah,
don't
we
really-
basically, the thing about being the audio folks is that a lot of, and we've talked about this before in previous podcasts and previous Let's Plays, that audio is not something that game designers immediately think of, despite it being probably one of the more important aspects of a game. So when we got there, there was a grand total of us and one other guy who was doing audio. And sorry, we ended up doing icebreaker stuff, which is nice, trying to meet other people. But ultimately, we ended up working for like 5 different groups at the same time, purely because we had to. If everyone
Yeah.
wanted decent audio. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is something we also learned from last time. So the last time we went, we kind of we more or less just did it separately, and we each found a team and just kind of stuck with them and did the music, and that worked out in different ways. For Richard, it meant a lot of sitting around, and
Yeah.
for me, it meant a butt ton of music to get written.
Yeah, back in 2014, basically, Stefan worked with a game company called Stirfire, who actually have released proper games. So
Yeah.
they were much more adventurous with their ideas back then. And I was stuck with a small group who were really cool, but they basically, their idea began as like some kind of house thing. So I was like, oh, The Sims.
Yeah.
So I started kind of writing something like that. And then I came back the next morning because we stayed around at Stefan's house and came back each day. And they were like, oh, no, we've made it about dwarves. I was like, okay, so fantasy music. Easy
Alrighty
peasy.
then.
Yeah, so I basically churned out this super easy, well, Dwarf Squad Ho, as it's called on my SoundCloud,
Yeah.
which has ended up being my second most popular piece ever. So, I suppose that helps.
Go figure. Yeah.
But it was like I wrote it in a couple of hours and then just twiddled my thumbs for a lot of the time, which I really didn't want to do this time because I wanted to just do as much work as I could.
Yeah.
Effectively.
So I think, going before was a good experience for us because we knew that, rather than kind of that being a fulfilling experience, we thought, well, we're going to leverage off the fact that we collaborate and just grab as many groups as we can. As it turned out, like we were kind of, you're never quite sure who's going to rock up to these things as well. So we kind of didn't know whether we'd be the only guys there or we'd get there and all of a sudden there'd be like other budding composers there trying to become famous as well. But luckily as it turned out, we were pretty much like Richard said, there was one other guy there, but he was mainly working with
one team and he didn't have the experience to be doing that many things at the same time. We talked to him, he's a top bloke. But he was very God, what am I saying? I don't want to say anything that sounds offensive.
Yeah.
Basically, like he was amateur sounds bad.
Well, look, I mean, put it this way: he's
starting off.
His musical experience was different to ours. We've come through university study and kind of working, and particularly in the that kind of classical edge of live performance. Actually writing pieces and getting them performed and things like that. He's come up from like the studio kind of side of things, bands, recording, that kind of stuff. So like he does good stuff, but he's got a very different he's got a very different experience to us. And I think I know for me, in terms of when you're doing these kinds of projects, these kind of collaborations with multimedia games and stuff like that, it really does help having that experience of knowing how the process goes and how you're going to need to manage your time and, how the kind of how their development cycle goes as well. The big thing, if you're someone who knows anything about game development, you know all about the crunch and like the big sprints that happen at the end of the development cycle. So we knew ourselves that we needed to kind of plan everything out throughout the whole weekend so that it didn't come to the last 2 hours and we were trying to write like 10 pieces of music in the one go.
Yeah.
So it worked out well. I mean, we kind of started going around canvassing all the different teams because they'd all formed at that point and just kind of saying, hey, we do music and sound.
Yeah.
Do you want stuff? And we found that most guys kind of responded as we'd expected. They'd start by saying, we hadn't really thought about it up until now, which, expected. But then a lot of them were kind of like, oh yeah, we'll need that at some point. We'll come back to you. So at least you can get a rough idea at that point of what the game is, what they're planning to do. And even if you don't kind of have enough to actually start making the audio yet, you can start thinking about it and at least put into your list of kind of tasks what you're going to have to do for them. Like, what kind of music and audio and
that was it. It was just give us a basic idea, but we'll be much more active with you the next day. That's essentially what it was. Because ours I don't know if anyone else started at like 5 p.m. or something, but I think ours started like 7 p.m. on the Friday. And then it ended like 5 p.m. on the Sunday.
Yes.
Officially. So the Friday was essentially, as Stefan said, we went around and said, hey, do you need audio? And they're like, I guess. And we were like, no, we totally understand. We're just kind of putting our name out. So then on Saturday and Sunday, you're aware of who can help you out when it comes to the audio side of things.
Yeah.
So that was essentially our Friday.
Friday was funnily very uneventful, I guess. But it kind of varied between teams as well. And I'll compare again between the guys, like the Stir-Fi guys were there again this year. And they were one of the groups that we worked with again. And you can really see the difference as well. I mean, the great thing about the game jam is that anyone can rock up and you don't have to be an experienced game developer to go and do something. That's not the point. But it is interesting because you have these different levels of team to see the difference between the guys who kind of don't really do this. They might be involved with game dev, but they're not like a kind of established studio. They kind of fit into that mold of the guys we were talking about just before. Yeah. But you look at a group like Stir-Fi, they were still in the same phase as everyone else, but because they've done the whole thing before, they've put games out and they've actually published them. They knew that they had to have their ideas formed a lot sooner than a lot of other groups did. So we got more of an idea. Again, like we still had to wait on them until they were kind of ready to properly talk audio, but we got more of an idea out of those teams than
and the initial
others.
idea they gave us was actually to do with one of the diversifiers. I'm going to forget that word. The first word that came into my head was denouncer, and I'm like, that's not the word.
Not quite.
Yeah, not quite. But one of the sub themes, damn it. Diversifiers, right? One of the diversifiers was all the audio is to be done with a voice or vocals or anything, the human voice.
Yeah, that the diversified just said the voice, and we took that to mean that, as Richard just said.
Yeah, that's it. Like, it didn't specify our own voice, so we were like, okay, so we can use choirs, we can use vocal samples, things like that. And it also didn't specify pure samples, so we said like, okay, so if we mashed it up and screwed with it so it sounded like something completely different, that still counts, right? And we decided it did because the wording said just vocals.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was a bit vague.
But that's what Stir-Fi wanted us to do.
Yeah.
They said, we want to go for this. So, give us some idea or have some ideas ready for vocal-based things. And they also mentioned that they'd already, like you said, they already had a fairly solid idea of you making a machine do something. So they said, like, think about the audio with that too.
Yeah. And it was an interesting one because they already knew as well that they were going to be doing a VR game. So that was kind of good to know because it's a different consideration to the other games. Like, actually, let's just roll with this one for a bit. So like, one of the good things for us about going to things like the game jams is it gives you a good opportunity to kind of practice the whole cycle on the audio side of things, which is not just writing the music and recording the audio, which is our specialty, but also assisting with implementing that in the game. And
yeah, that's it.
It was interesting to see because we've done we've done it before, and we kind of know what has to go in to a game. Like when you actually put the audio in, you have to consider about how it's going to work in the engine, how it's going to be triggered, and where it's going to be. And it's actually a good experience doing that for a full like a VR game because I mean there's always even in your standard 3D game, to a point you will have things, you will have sounds being triggered like at certain points and by certain sources and things. But there's a different kind of when you have the immersion of like a VR headset, you really have to think very carefully about how things are going to sound in the game when they're triggered and how they kind of react with the world.
I completely agree because that one of the big things I always tell any kind of budding composers who ask me anything on the web, my response to them is always composing is maybe about 25% of being a composer. Like the rest of it is admin work, and programming. Because you've got to do all this organizing stuff for recording things. You've got to know how to record, get the people there, and all that. And when it comes to game audio, you've got to think about the engine they're using, what programming kind of systems they're using at all, even down to maybe what programming language is being used for the engine or for whatever they're doing. It's hugely complicated, or far more complicated than people think it is. When they go like, I want to write music, it's like, well, can you code too?
And I think a lot of people forget as well that like there are some people like if you are one of the guys who's lucky enough to be working in like the top tier of stuff, then that stuff is delegated between people. But if you're looking to get into games and you're going to be working with a lot of like indie studios or small teams of people, like you have to do a lot of it because you just don't have the budget to get in people who specialize in that stuff, and B, like it's just it's knowledge that you need so that it makes your life easier when you're doing the project. You don't have to go back and do things because they come back to you and they're like, well, no, this doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Stirfire's thing, VR is the deep end of this big audio pool. So because you've got a whole different extra dimension to think about when it comes to the audio. It's not a simple case of, oh, we'll just do it in stereo, left, right, panning. You got to think about the Z axis too.
Yeah.
Which made it very interesting for doing that in 48 hours. But yeah, like to begin with, it was just a simple, like, have a think about it. We'll get back to you with more later. So we went home and slept. And then
sleep is like sorry to butt in, but just like sleep is the rare commodity of game jams for most people. So grab it when you can.
Yeah, I actually found people were a lot better with sleep this year because when we went in 2014, like no one slept besides us. So when we got there on the Sunday, that everyone was in a zombie-like state. Whereas this year, everyone tried to get some sleep because they were aware that you can't work in a zombie-like state. Sorry. On the Saturday, we came back and everyone had a much better idea on what they wanted to do. And with our 5 projects, we basically went around again, asked them what they were doing, what they felt like the audio would be like, and then we kind of sat down and started doing all of them. easy peasy. So, well, let's go through each project and just discuss what we did with each one.
Sure.
Let's go with the maze one first.
Oh
Breakout,
yeah,
it was
the
eventually
maze.
called.
Yeah, so these guys we'd actually bumped into them earlier in the piece because a lot of those guys were the ones that went to the icebreaker exercises. So just to touch back on the icebreaker exercises briefly, generally the guys that go there are the ones who haven't come with a team already made up. They have whatever their particular skills are, and they're just looking to kind of be put together with people to actually do the game. So these guys were more or less all like they got put together in that icebreaker thing, and so they we kind of left them for a while because they'd spent a while thinking about the theme and how it's going to work and what they were doing, and they eventually came back to us and said that they were doing this game thing, this maze thing, game thing.
Doing a game.
Yeah, doing a game at Game Jam. What? So basically, the idea that they took the idea of ritual as repetition, this idea of kind of repeatedly performing.
as literally playing a game.
Yeah.
That's what the ritual was, pressing A to jump, going forward with the control stick, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So they kind of built that around the idea of this big maze and having to beat a high score. And when you beat a high score or speed run or anything like that, and when you ever try to beat something in a game, you practice and practice and practice and go through it and just constantly repeat it. And their idea was they had this maze, and the high score was doing it in 1 second, and you had to beat that. And as you can imagine, it was a fairly big maze, so 1 second is nigh on impossible. And I'm sure we're allowed to spoil the ending for them because
I'm
it's,
sure.
it's been a while.
Yeah, if you really want to play it, then just don't listen for like 2 minutes. But we're going to spoil it. So.
But basically, the idea was that you had to break the ritual in order to beat the high score, and that was a simple case of just turning around and going the other way. Which was quite a clever idea, I thought.
Yeah.
And then as an extra thing, because they called it breakout because you break out of the ritual, but then they also had a little extra mini game of actual break out the game. The one with the panel at the bottom and the dot, the ping pong ball or whatever, going up and hitting other blocks. That was literally just an extra little mini game on the end. And they fleshed it out considerably since then, but at the time it was essentially that. And they said, we want kind of the basic sound design stuff, walking sounds, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then we also want 2 pieces, one of them for the ritual thing and one of them for the you did it thing.
Yeah, the yay.
Yeah, yay, you figured it out.
Yeah. So it was this one was kind of interesting for us because it was quite open-ended. I mean, obviously the sound effects are fairly straightforward for these kinds of things. But yeah, they didn't really have too much of, like Richard said, apart from wanting like these 2 contrasting pieces, they didn't really have much of an idea of how that was going to happen. They just said that's what they wanted. So we knew like sound effects weren't really a problem. So we ended up just with the music. We kind of had a look at the aesthetic of the game.
Yeah, which is very kind of pastel-y Minecraft, I guess.
Yeah, so it
was voxel based.
It really had that blocky kind of voxel look.
And then the colors were kind of a bit washy. So,
So basically what I just did...
because Stefan took over for the music for that one. He did all of it.
So basically what I did was just took that to be a very kind of synthetic feel, so I went just with mainly synthy instruments to get the contrast. What we did was just so like the maze game, it's very like rhythmic and percussive because the whole idea they wanted with that point of the maze was like everything about the design of that game would be like urging you to go forwards. So with the time and the leaderboard and the way you're placed at the start of the maze, like we wanted everything to really be like urging you to go forward, to kind of make the trick of stopping and just like
Turn
turning
around,
around.
not an obvious thing.
Yeah, not an obvious thing, you know, to kind of override that thought process. So we thought that, you know, having this kind of urgent music would really help with that. And then, yeah, just a simple contrast. Otherwise, still kind of synthy. What did I use? Oh, I used a couple of just like tuned percussion instruments for that. Just a nice little tune.
Yeah.
Those ones are quite nice in game jams because they're not too involved. Like you can just write a nice sounding piece, and like really with these game jams, you don't want to try and be too ambitious with what you write. Like you want to write good music, but I mean at the end of the day you only have 48 hours, so you know just as long as you make something that like fits and sounds good, that's
it. So
the deal.
yeah, and that was a big thing for one of the other projects we did, which was called Ritual Failure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because their initial idea was, as the name suggests, you do rituals, but you're not very good at them and you fail them, which it aesthetically turned out really good because it was where you had these little like Magica-esque dudes with giant hats running around and kind of a what's the word, 3/4 bird's eye view kind of
so like isometric kind of top-down view.
That's the word I was looking for. And then you'd run along this procedurally generated cave and find these summoning circles, and then you go onto each corner of them and press a button, and according to those buttons is what you summon. So it'd be like some potato body with goat head and
like lobster hands.
Lobster hands and like
chicken feet.
So it'd be crazy things like that, and that was done really well. But initially what they wanted to do was a kind of rhythmic based thing where the 4 people playing would stand on each corner, and then it would start doing a rhythmic kind of game where the top person has to press every time the cursor gets to the bottom of the circle and so on and so forth. If anyone's done any research onto gamelan based things, it's basically their way of composing. Because then the second person would have to hit at like maybe the horizontal every time it became on the horizontal plane. And then the third one would have to do every quarter, and the fourth one would have to do like every eighth.
Whatever,
Yeah, something like that. So they asked us to do music like that. So straight away we're like, okay, well, we need to actually break it down into its individual bits and have it activate whenever they trigger. You know, which is easy enough, and we did that perfectly fine. But as we said, the ambition behind that was really great, but they had 48 hours to do it. So by the time Sunday rolled around, they had to scale back tremendously. And it just ended up being a press a button on each of the corners, and that's it. So a lot of the music we did for that ended up not being used. That being said, they did considering I just mentioned gamelan, they did actually use some gamelan samples we gave them, and that sounded really good.
Yeah, it worked really well.
I ended up in literally 5 minutes just opening up 2 evolving synths, mashing them together and just going, there you go, there's some cave ambience. Because they said, I asked them what do they want music wise, and they said, because the music's being based on the actual ritual, we want just some atmospheric horror-esque cave music. And I was like, okay, so you want this then. And literally in 5 to 10 minutes I just opened up a couple of evolving synths and made them run for about 1.5 minutes, and then that was that. And they were like, yeah, great. But a lot of the other music we made ended up just being scrapped for that project. So for advice in regards to the game jam, you know, don't be too ambitious in that regard, because then things like that happen. Where you do work and then realize that you can't do that in that time and have to scale back.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be ambitious, and don't be precious about things as well, because, you know, if you do, even if you're not necessarily ambitious, sometimes like you have to cut stuff anyway, and you just don't have the time to like mourn your losses. You just kind of have to. Yeah, you just have to cut things and move on.
That being said, Ritual Failure was a really good and one of the better games that came out of the game jam.
It's a super fun game. Like we only saw it briefly at the actual game jam, but we played it the other night at a like follow-up event they had here, and they had it running with a few controllers, and it was actually for like a very simple little game, super fun. Especially with the glitches of cutting through walls.
That was fun. Yeah, in order to run away from the monsters in the cave, like we quickly found out that you could clip through walls if you pushed hard enough. So we basically just clipped through walls all the time.
Yeah,
which is very funny.
That was ritual failure.
Yeah, that was ritual failure. The third game, there were 3 more games. One of them was Stir Fire, and there were 2 other ones which I did. One of them, I can't remember the name of it, but it was done by a father-son duo.
Oh, that was Inti's Trial.
Inti's Trial, that's the one. And what they did was they had a big totem pole with a maze around it. You had to move the each column section around to get a ball through the maze. It was, if anyone's played Metroid Prime, there's a specific puzzle in there. I think it's in Vendrana Drifts, the snow area. I think it's in there, where there's this huge column in the center of this room, and there's like these morph ball speed things. You go into the corner, and each one moves a section of the column, and you've got to basically build a path through the column in order to get yourself back up. It's essentially like that, except the ball is going down, and you've got to move the ball down the maze. And for that one was interesting because the music again was okay. Well, totem, tribal, bam, done. You know, I basically just like some marimba stuff with some tribal drums, easy peasy. Nothing too spectacular there. But the sound effects were good because they wanted fire and they wanted the sound of the columns moving. And that posed a different kind of, a different challenge for us because like with Breakout, walking samples are easy to get or make. You know, they're relatively easy to make. But they wanted fire, which is not an easy thing to get. And they wanted, as I said, the columns moving thing, which we briefly talked about and decided on both of them being quite easy to do as Foley recordings, which is what we did at Saturday night. So when we came back home and did the Foley recordings, the fire ended up being a muesli bar wrapper. Because if you get a muesli bar wrapper and just kind of scrunch it up in your hands,
caress it a bit.
Yeah, it sounds like fire. And then you put it into your whatever workstation you're using on your computer and just add a bit of kind of hum, like a low wind type thing, kind of like a
wind noise.
That sort of thing. Yeah, I was hoping that wouldn't clip anything, but it's good.
No, see, you learned your lesson this time, and you actually like did the as opposed to the blowing.
Yeah,
I think what we did do at the time was just kind of blow across the microphone, which is great for filling up the spectrum, but it also means that you just instantly clip because it's just like nothing but air pressure. Pro tip, if you're doing fire, just make sure you don't actually like blow too much air into the microphone.
But that's what we did with the fire, and it worked really well. Like, no, they only knew it was a muesli bar wrapper because I told them, and they were like, very funny. And then the column we did by getting 2 bricks in the garden and basically grinding them together. And that was easily one of the most convincing samples we've ever made.
Yeah, I was very surprised because when they mentioned they wanted this kind of column noise, I thought, well, stone column. I thought instantly you want that kind of like, you think of that really like heavy grinding noise of, whatever
stone
like
being
movies
moved.
You've seen of like heavy stone doors or whatever. So the only thing I could think of at home that we had was some bricks, but my only worry was like, they might sound a bit kind of weak. So I thought, maybe we'll just have to treat them and like, pump up the bass or something. But we took a recording and I just got 2 bricks and we were just kind of rubbing them together in a circular motion and it was a super good sound. Like, again, like I don't think that it doesn't really sound like just 2 kind of regular sized bricks. When you do it, when you kind of record it right up next to a microphone, you really get a lot of low end in the sound, which I wasn't expecting.
That was a nice experience and a nice set of extra samples to use in the future. That was that one. And then the 4th one besides Stir Fires was one which unfortunately they abandoned at the end because I don't think they got far enough with it. Can't remember what they called it again. It was something failure again. No, something ritual again, like special ritual or something.
Whatever, yeah.
And the idea was that you were in this like 2D side-scrolling arena thing, and you had to guess your opponent's dance as they tried to guess yours, and the first person to guess it would summon some beast to kill the other person. So it was a sound idea, but they just didn't get far enough in the 48 hours to finish it, and then they just kind of abandoned it, which was a shame because music-wise, they said we want some kind of silly cartoony thing. So I did exactly that.
He delivered, friends. He
Oh
delivered.
yeah, there was kind of like honking saxophones and xylophones doing the ring thingy, and the whistle, wind up whistle thing that you can get, and honking horns, honk honk, that sort of thing. It was great. I loved making that. But it never got to see the light of day in an actual game, which is a shame. And then the sound effects, they wanted typical stuff again, except for the monster, which we ended up just having Stefan make a crazy pterodactyl noise, which you can
I should probably demonstrate
that if you want.
That's probably going to clip.
That sort of, yeah, you're right.
It's kind of hard to...
We're sound designers, we can fix that.
Yeah. It's very hard to do that softly.
Yeah.
Fun noise.
Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah. And we did a bunch of them and just gave them to them. And they're like, sweet, thank you. And like if they'd managed to finish it, I reckon it would have been a really good concept of a game. But unfortunately, they didn't get too far. And like literally disappeared off the face of the earth. Yeah, that's it.
Like
around Sunday lunchtime, they just disappeared. And I was like, okay, well, nice meeting you, so but oh well, never mind. Those sort of things happen in this kind of extremely get things done quick time frame, so it's just a thing that happens.
There's more life lessons.
More life lessons learned
sometimes
from the weekend of Game Jam.
Well,
sorry, I was drinking.
No, that's okay. I suppose that leaves us with one more to talk about.
Then we have stir fire to do. Well, it's the most complicated one we had to do, so we might as well leave it till last. So stir fire's one was called Symphony of the Machine, and the finished product was it was virtual reality. You were in this kind of sci-fi looking room, and there was a machine in the middle with 2 left and right buttons and then 3 buttons on it, and if you press the left and right, it turned to give you 3 more buttons. And you pressed those buttons and created like a 3-button combo, and then you'd press the button on the side and it would change the weather according to what the combo was, which is a cool idea, especially with the whole VR thing. It actually worked quite well. And for the audio side of things, we had the challenge of 1, having to do it with just voices, but 2, like coming up with some convincing sound effects that will function within the art style aesthetic that they'd made, because it was how would you describe the art style that they had created?
Well, it was an interesting kind of mishmash of things, because like outside the room you had just kind of typical natural environment, rolling plains and green things, and the design of, so you're kind of surrounded by this dome thing, which is kind of cool. Like the style of that was quite cool as well, because it was kind of like broken stone kind of thing. It like looking like it was in some sort of disrepair. Whereas the actual machinery was, shiny and metallic, and kind of all these, there's kind of light paths everywhere and things.
For me it was essentially like a colorful sci-fi look to it. So we had to come up with that sort of thing. I think we did a pretty good job in the end, because we needed to do voice. It was like, okay, well, what can we do with this? And the initial thought was that each button on the machine had a different symbol to it. So like, well, maybe each one needs a different sound. And then we decided to do voice in the literal sense, where we actually recorded voice. And we, on the Saturday night where we recorded the bricks, we also recorded Stefan singing notes up the white notes of the keyboard, also known as C major for those fact fans out there, or A minor. A natural minor, if you want to get technical.
C Ionian.
Or C Ionian.
Blah, blah, blah. Yep.
So we basically did that, and we took each note, and we also took like a syllable of some kind.
Yeah.
It was things like initially from Ra and Ra from rain
Yeah.
and a V from wind, that sort of thing.
So yes, so the idea initially behind that was because they'd kind of said before they'd given us the idea that the game kind of revolved around these different combinations of buttons and finding the right combination within those. So the initial idea was to kind of create a quasi language out of these vocal sounds, so that once you kind of had the combinations worked out and things like that, you'd kind of have this extra cue of things sounding like, if they sound like a word, then it would make weather, and if it sounded really disjointed, it would
just do
just
nothing.
do nothing.
Yeah, that's it.
And that kind of didn't end up flowing in the time, so we just, like Richard said, we ended up taking the weather kind of words and changing them, which, I mean, initially the idea as well was that you kind of tee them up with because I think their idea after the kind of randomized thing didn't work, the idea was that maybe like the individual things would correspond to, like, you'd have different options for like wind or how much rain you had or things, so that would kind of feed into that. And again, being a game jam, that kind of didn't really come to fruition, so it ended up being more or less a random thing.
But it worked out in the end.
Worked well, yeah.
What happened was, every time you played one of the buttons on the machine, it would play whichever sample it was, and then once you had all three and you pressed the go button, it would play all three in succession. So you ended up kind of making your own little melodies at the same time, which was a nice little add-on to the whole changing the machine, the weather business. And we never got around to doing weather samples and anything like that, which is a shame.
Yeah, it was. Well, I don't know. Funnily enough, sorry, we did have rain that weekend, but it wasn't very convincing rain.
No, it wasn't very convincing rain, and there were builders outside who kept saying hello to me every time they passed, and I was standing in the rain with the microphone. I'm like, this isn't helping. So we didn't get any rain samples into it, but like the sound design things with that were relatively easy, because we didn't have to think too much about the spatial aspect of it. But the music itself actually became a lot harder than it would be if it wasn't a VR thing, because basically Stefan began by writing out some lovely kind of atmospheric flowing, I wouldn't call them chord progressions, but like a progression of harmonies.
It's just a very kind of ambient sound world.
Yeah. And he plonked it on a like synthy bass type thing. Then I took that MIDI and I plonked it onto a vocal library, which, if anyone's heard it, is called Vocalite by Heaviosity. It's one of their Gravity packs. And I put it on there and used like the 6-channel version with like 6 different voices on 6 different channels. And then I made 3 separate kind of stutter systems and made 2 channels go to one, 2 channels go to another, and so on and so forth. And basically panned them out and made them move about accordingly. And it sounded really good with Stefan's kind of harmonies and my sound design. And we fleshed that out to about a minute and a half and gave it to them. And Brandon, who is the main person we communicated with, asked us whether, because it's VR, he wanted to do a kind of spatial soundtrack. So he wanted let's say the soprano to actually sound like they're coming from over in the left side of the machine, or the tenor, inverted commas, because the tenor was literally just soprano pitched down, to give it that more kind of sci-fi vibe that we were trying to get. They wanted them to be literally behind them, not in a kind of stereo fake sense, but in a literal spatially they were behind them.
The sound sources.
So we ended up extracting each individual channel onto its own waveform, and then bouncing them, and then passing them on to them, who then put it in the world spatially, which was interesting because I initially listened through, and I think they need to get better headphones for this sort of thing if they want to impress people. But listening through, like I said, it didn't really make much of a difference at the time because they'd spaced them out, but because you were kind of in this room, it didn't do much because it was like in a it felt like it was in a small room where that kind of spatial recognition didn't matter. And I think they fixed it somewhat with doing or using a kind of spatial system that I don't know if Unity has or if it's Fmod or one of those.
Yeah.
It's one of those. But it works a lot better then. But it was an interesting experience because usually our role would be done once we'd bounced the whole thing in stereo and just handed it over. But in this case, it was where we had to actually delve into our composition and extract it accordingly and, mix it accordingly, which was a very interesting experience. And yeah, it makes you think a lot about as we said at the beginning of this, what needs to go into composition that's not actually composition.
Yeah. I guess as well, it's a good reminder that even if you're not necessarily doing like a VR project like this, in anything that you're doing for this kind of stuff, where you're kind of rendering it and bouncing it yourself, and you're not handing it off to like a musician to record and play, you just have to. You always need to be thinking about like the actual mixing and output of your track. So obviously levels, but to an extent as well. Making sure things are like panned accordingly and creating that space, because when you output it and it's going into this kind of concept of an area with space, like it just it adds something extra to have that in. If you don't have if you just have it all kind of leveled a bit, pan center, it doesn't really it actually sounds fairly flat when you listen to it in that context. So
yeah, and considering that VR is kind of where people are trying to push for the future of games, whether it'll be as big as what they want remains to be seen, but it's definitely becoming a thing. Awareness and knowledge of spatial audio is becoming a crucial aspect of the composer's repertoire. So yeah, that was essentially our experience with the Game Jam. It's super fun. I thoroughly recommend it to everyone, and I'd definitely do it next year if I'm still around.
Yeah, I'll definitely be heading back. It'd be interesting to go and actually do a game as
Make
well.
a game proper.
Like as fun as the audio is, and as much as I enjoy going and writing music for people, like and if you're thinking about like even just like dabbling in games, I mean, you might not be kind of have dreams of being a big game dev, but like if you want to learn a bit of game design and development, like it's the perfect place to go. And you really don't need to be highly skilled before you go. Like if you just have a basic grounding in like design or art or a bit of coding or bit of audio or whatever, like you can go and contribute and have a big input in actually making a
That's
game.
it. It's all about collaboration, regardless of your experience and regardless of your specialty. Everyone's got a role in the Game Jam, regardless of anything.
That's it.
And making a game next year would be super interesting because, especially if we focus on audio, because the OSIC headphones will be out by then.
Yes.
And so we'll be able to make some kind of spatial thing that will actually legit work.
Yeah. Speaking of the OSIC headphones, if you've been living under a rock and haven't seen the Kickstarter or anything, go and have a look and seriously consider backing it. I think there's like a few early bird ones left. I don't know at this point in time.
I think by the time this comes out, there
probably won't be. But I mean, even have a look. Like if you're really that interested, like the early bird discount was a bonus, but like it's a seriously impressive looking product, and if it delivers and what they're asking, like that will be something to
for sure.
look
And
out
I've
for.
heard a lot of people kind of on their Facebook and on whatever social media where this sort of thing usually happens, where they're like, oh, it's all a lie, it's bullshit, blah, blah, blah. and it's one of those things which it be living in Australia, it's difficult to tell because there's no way of us actually testing it first. They've kind of toured the west coast of America, I
Yeah, they
believe.
did like the
Yeah,
Silicon Valley tour
yeah,
essentially, but
yeah.
yeah.
And people coming out of that said like it's legit, it's really good. But I think the one thing that convinced me completely, and which should convince you if you're thinking about it, is that THX have actually what's the word? Like sided with them,
Yeah, they're
partnered with
supporting
them,
the project,
partners.
yeah.
That's the word. Yeah, and I don't know about you, but THX knows a little bit more about audio than us. So if they're on board with it, then it sure as hell is a winning idea.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like it generally, like, to me, it checks out a lot more than some of the flakier Kickstarter projects I've seen, because they've gone through the whole seed funding process, they've gone through the innovation workshops and like the pitching process. So
Yeah.
like they had a very firm product before they came to Kickstarter, and that's normally a good sign. Like when people are using Kickstarter as like a tool along the way rather than throwing up an idea and hope that the money sticks.
Yeah.
Like usually, more often than not, a good sign that it's going to be a winner. But yeah, we've backed it and we're eagerly awaiting the end of the year when they're supposed to be shipping out.
Yeah. That'd be great. Yeah. So
Yeah.
looking forward to that. But anyway, I think that should be enough time for now. I
Yeah.
hope you enjoyed our talk about Game Jam and made you eager to do it next year. Or there's plenty of other Game Jams that don't have the name Global Game Jam, which happen like throughout the year. So it's worth seeing what's happening in your local community. And
Sure.
then just, enjoy yourselves with it. All right.
Bye.
Catch you later.